"Ma'am, you need to come with us. Right now." The words cut through the first-class cabin like a blade, sharp enough to silence every conversation within earshot. Naomi Brooks looked up slowly from her window seat, her expression calm, almost unreadable, while two airport security officers stood in the aisle beside her. Around them, dozens of passengers watched in stunned silence. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious. A few already had their phones in their hands. Naomi didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at the officer standing closest to her and asked one question. "May I know why?" The officer shifted slightly. "You've been reported for refusing crew instructions." A murmur spread through the cabin. Naomi glanced toward the front of the aircraft where Chief Flight Attendant Rebecca Sullivan stood with her arms folded. Her face carried the confidence of someone who believed she was completely in the right. "That's not what happened," Naomi said quietly. Rebecca immediately stepped forward. "You were told multiple times that your seat assignment was under review. Instead of cooperating, you challenged my authority in front of other passengers." Naomi blinked once. "I showed you my boarding pass." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "And I made it clear there was an issue." The tension in the cabin became almost physical. The air no longer felt cool and comfortable. It felt charged, like a storm waiting for permission to break. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman lowered the magazine she had been pretending to read. 2 rows back, a young man discreetly angled his phone toward the confrontation. Nobody seemed interested in looking away anymore. Naomi remained seated. Her black hoodie, dark jeans, and white sneakers looked ordinary against the luxury of the first-class cabin. No designer labels. No expensive jewelry. Nothing that announced power. Nothing that announced wealth. Nothing that suggested the woman sitting in seat 2A controlled millions of dollars in investment capital. Rebecca pointed toward the exit. "The aircraft is preparing for departure. If you won't comply voluntarily, security will escort you off." Several passengers exchanged uneasy glances. One elderly man near the aisle frowned. "She hasn't done anything," he muttered. Rebecca ignored him. Naomi slowly stood from her seat. Not because she was intimidated. Not because she had lost. She stood because she understood something the others didn't. Sometimes the truth arrives faster when people are allowed to reveal themselves completely. The officer gestured politely toward the front of the cabin. Naomi picked up her small carry-on bag and stepped into the aisle. The silence followed her. So did the eyes. As she walked toward the aircraft door, a young flight attendant near the galley looked visibly uncomfortable. Emily Carter, 24 years old, new to the airline. Her eyes moved from Naomi to Rebecca and back again. Something about the situation didn't sit right with her. Something felt wrong. But before she could speak, Rebecca shot her a warning look. Emily lowered her gaze. Naomi noticed. She noticed everything. At the aircraft door, she paused briefly and looked back across the cabin. Dozens of faces stared at her. Some confused, some sympathetic, some convinced she must have done something wrong. Rebecca folded her arms and smiled with quiet satisfaction. What she didn't know was that the woman she had just removed from the flight was about to cost the airline far more than a single first-class seat. In less than an hour, executives would be scrambling, phones would be ringing across multiple states, and a $3 million funding agreement would disappear with a single decision. But for now, Naomi Brooks simply stepped off the aircraft and into the jet bridge, while behind her, the entire airline continued racing toward a mistake it could no longer stop. 30 minutes earlier, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport moved with the familiar rhythm of a busy afternoon. Rolling suitcases rattled across polished floors. Boarding announcements echoed overhead. Travelers hurried toward gates with coffee cups in hand and eyes fixed on departure screens. Naomi Brooks walked through the terminal alone. No assistant. No security detail. No designer luggage announcing her status. Just a small carry-on, a black hoodie, dark jeans, and comfortable sneakers. Most people passed her without a second glance. That was exactly how she preferred it. For the past 6 months, Brooks Capital Ventures had been evaluating transportation investments across the country. Airlines were competing for funding, partnerships, and expansion opportunities. One carrier in particular had attracted Naomi's attention. On paper, the company looked promising. Revenue was growing. Routes were expanding. Executives spoke confidently about customer experience. But Naomi had built her career on one simple belief. Reports could be polished. Presentations could be rehearsed. Numbers could be arranged to tell almost any story. Real culture revealed itself when nobody important was watching. That was why she traveled this way. No announcements. No special treatment. No warning. She wanted to see the company exactly as ordinary customers experienced it. As she approached Gate B17, passengers were already gathering near the boarding area. Families sat charging phones. Business travelers answered emails. Flight attendants moved between the aircraft and the gate podium preparing for departure. Naomi checked her boarding pass. Seat 2A, first class, purchased under her legal name. Everything was straightforward. She found an empty seat near the window overlooking the runway and quietly waited. A few minutes later, a sharp voice interrupted the calm atmosphere. Boarding for first-class passengers will begin now. The announcement came from Rebecca Sullivan, the lead flight attendant assigned to the flight. She stood near the gate podium with a confident smile and a posture that suggested she enjoyed being in control of the room. Naomi joined the boarding line and waited patiently. When her turn arrived, she handed over her boarding pass. The scanner flashed green immediately. A clean confirmation. No issue. No warning. No problem. But Rebecca's eyes lingered longer than necessary. She glanced at the pass, then at Naomi, then back at the pass again. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but Naomi noticed it. Years of experience had taught her to recognize certain looks, the kind that arrived before questions, before assumptions, before trouble. Rebecca forced a polite smile. Enjoy your flight. Naomi nodded and stepped onto the jet bridge. The aircraft cabin was quiet and nearly empty. She located seat 2A, placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment, and settled comfortably into her seat. Outside the window, baggage crews worked beneath the afternoon sun. Everything appeared normal. But several rows away, Rebecca entered the cabin and stopped abruptly when she noticed Naomi seated in first class. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A subtle shift that most people would never notice. Naomi noticed. She always did. The flight attendant studied her for a moment before turning away and walking toward the galley. A few minutes later, another crew member joined her. They exchanged quiet words. Both glanced toward seat 2A. Naomi looked out the window and said nothing. The aircraft remained still. Passengers continued boarding. Somewhere beyond the cabin walls, the engines waited for clearance. And without realizing it, everyone on that flight was moving closer to a decision that would soon cost an airline far more than anyone could imagine. Passengers continued filing into the cabin while the atmosphere slowly shifted in ways most people could not yet see. Naomi Brooks remained seated by the window, reviewing messages on her phone. She looked relaxed, unbothered. The kind of traveler who knew exactly where she was going and had no need to prove anything to anyone. Across the aisle, a well-dressed businessman stopped beside seat 3C and glanced toward Naomi before placing his leather briefcase in the overhead compartment. His name was Richard Langford, a corporate consultant from Charlotte. He adjusted his expensive watch and looked toward Rebecca Sullivan. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I thought this section was reserved for premium passengers." Rebecca forced a professional smile, but her eyes immediately drifted toward Naomi. "It is," she replied. Richard nodded slightly. Interesting. The comment was subtle, but it landed exactly where Rebecca wanted it to. A few moments later, she approached Naomi's seat. "Ma'am, I need to verify your boarding information one more time." Naomi looked up calmly. "You already verified it at the gate." Rebecca maintained her smile. "This is just a routine check." Naomi handed over her boarding pass without hesitation. Rebecca studied it again. The same result. Seat 2A. Fully confirmed. First class. No irregularities. No alerts. Nothing. Yet she did not walk away. "Would you mind showing identification as well?" Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Has every first-class passenger been asked to do that?" Rebecca's smile tightened. "I am simply following procedure." Several nearby passengers began paying closer attention. Naomi handed over her identification. Rebecca examined it for several seconds before returning it. Still nothing. Everything matched perfectly. But instead of ending the conversation, Rebecca looked increasingly frustrated by the lack of a problem. Back in the galley, she spoke quietly with another crew member. Their conversation lasted less than a minute. Both glanced toward Naomi. Both glanced away when they realized she had noticed. The cabin no longer felt routine. It felt staged. as though everyone had unknowingly been assigned a role, except Naomi herself. A few rows behind first class, Emily Carter watched the interaction carefully. She was still new enough to notice things veteran employees ignored. Rebecca's behavior bothered her. The boarding pass had scanned successfully. The identification matched. The reservation was valid. Yet the scrutiny continued. Emily opened the crew tablet and quietly reviewed the passenger manifest. Her eyes moved down the list until she found seat 2A. Naomi Brooks. Confirmed first class. Frequent traveler. Executive status. No restrictions. No concerns. Emily frowned. The system was clear. There should have been no issue at all. Meanwhile, Richard settled into his seat and spoke loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. These airlines really need to tighten security these days. A few people nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Naomi heard every word but remained focused on her phone. Years of success had taught her that assumptions often revealed more about the speaker than the target. Rebecca returned once again, this time with a supervisor from the gate area. The supervisor glanced at Naomi, then at the boarding pass, then at Rebecca. "Everything looks correct," he said quietly. Rebecca's expression hardened. "I would still like additional verification." The supervisor hesitated before walking away. Naomi watched the exchange unfold with growing clarity. The issue was no longer her ticket. The issue was something else entirely. Something harder to explain. Something nobody wanted to say out loud. Around her, conversation slowed. Eyes lingered longer. The aircraft door remained open. Boarding continued. But beneath the ordinary sounds of travel, another story was beginning to take shape. One built entirely on assumptions. And assumptions, Naomi knew better than anyone, often came with a very expensive price. Emily Carter could not stop looking at the passenger manifest. She checked it once, then twice, then a third time. The result never changed. Naomi Brooks was exactly where she was supposed to be. Seat 2A. First class. Fully ticketed. Fully verified. No flags. No warnings. No issues of any kind. Emily glanced toward the front of the cabin where Rebecca Sullivan was speaking with another crew member. Their voices remained low, but their attention never seemed to leave Naomi for very long. Something felt wrong. Not unusual. Wrong. There was a difference. Emily had joined the airline because she believed customer service mattered. She believed professionalism mattered. Most importantly, she believed every passenger deserved to be treated with dignity. What she was watching did not feel like professionalism. It felt personal. Across the cabin, Naomi remained calm. Her phone rested on the tray table while she reviewed a few documents. Every movement appeared deliberate, measured, controlled. She showed no signs of frustration, no signs of fear. Yet Emily noticed something else. Naomi was paying attention to everything. Every glance, every whisper, every unnecessary question. Nothing escaped her. Near the boarding door, Rebecca's voice suddenly became sharper. "I am telling you there is something off here." Emily looked up. The gate supervisor who had previously reviewed the boarding pass appeared increasingly uncomfortable. "Rebecca, the reservation is valid," he replied quietly. "The system confirms everything." Rebecca folded her arms. "Then explain why none of this feels right." The supervisor stared at her for a moment before walking away without another word. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Feel right. Those words lingered in her mind. Because facts were supposed to matter. Procedures were supposed to matter. Verification was supposed to matter. Feelings were not supposed to override any of them. Boarding continued. The aircraft was nearly full now. Overhead bins closed. Seatbelts clicked. Conversations settled into a low hum. Yet the tension surrounding Naomi seemed to grow stronger rather than fade away. Then Emily noticed something that made her pause. She opened Naomi's passenger profile one more time. An executive travel designation appeared attached to the reservation. It was not common. Very few passengers carried that level of status. Emily clicked deeper. Her eyes widened slightly. Additional notes appeared. Corporate travel partnerships. Frequent executive travel records. Special service history. The information was legitimate. Extensive. Impossible to fake. Emily looked toward Naomi again. Suddenly the situation seemed even stranger. Why was a passenger with that profile being questioned at all? Before she could think further, Rebecca appeared beside her. "What are you looking at?" Emily hesitated. "Her record." Rebecca's expression hardened immediately. "Close it, but everything checks out." Rebecca lowered her voice. "I did not ask for your opinion." Emily swallowed hard. I just think there may be a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Rebecca replied. Stay focused on your duties. Then she walked away. Emily remained frozen for several seconds. Around her, the cabin looked normal. Passengers organized bags. Parents helped children settle into seats. Flight attendants completed routine checks. Yet beneath that normal surface, something dangerous was taking shape. A story built entirely on assumptions instead of evidence. Emily looked toward Naomi one last time. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Naomi did not smile. She did not wave. But there was something in her expression that Emily understood immediately. It was the look of someone who had seen this before. Someone who recognized exactly where the situation was heading long before anyone else did. And as the aircraft prepared for departure, Emily quietly realized she might soon have to choose between following the crowd and standing beside the truth. The moment arrived quietly. There was no dramatic announcement. No sudden confrontation. Just a subtle shift in the atmosphere that told Naomi Brooks the situation had crossed a line. Rebecca Sullivan returned to seat 2A accompanied by an airport operations manager wearing a navy blazer and a strained expression. Behind him stood 2 security personnel. Their posture remained professional, but their presence changed everything. Conversations nearby began to fade. Passengers sensed something was about to happen. Rebecca stopped beside Naomi's seat. Ma'am, we need you to step into the jet bridge while we complete additional verification. Naomi looked up calmly. Additional verification of what exactly? The operations manager cleared his throat. There are concerns regarding your travel status. Naomi studied him for a moment. My boarding pass was verified. My identification was verified. My reservation was verified. What concern remains? The manager hesitated. The silence answered more than his words ever could. Around them, passengers were listening openly now. Richard Langford leaned back in his seat with obvious satisfaction. Several others exchanged uncomfortable looks. Emily Carter stood frozen near the galley. She knew the passenger record was valid. She knew the reservation was legitimate. Yet somehow the situation continued escalating. Rebecca folded her arms. If there is no issue, then stepping off briefly should not be a problem. Naomi held her gaze. The cabin felt smaller suddenly. The air heavier. Familiar. Painfully familiar. Because she had lived this moment before. 23 years earlier, Naomi had been a recent college graduate connecting through Dallas on her way to a job interview. She remembered the airport lounge, the expensive carpet, the leather chairs, the employee who looked at her boarding pass 3 separate times before asking whether she belonged there. She remembered the stares, the suspicion, the embarrassment of being treated like an intruder in a place she had every right to occupy. She remembered promising herself something that day. If success ever found her, she would never forget how that felt. Now, decades later, the scenery had changed, but the feeling remained exactly the same. Naomi returned to the present and slowly stood. The entire cabin seemed to watch. Very well, she said quietly. I will cooperate. Relief flashed across Rebecca's face. The operations manager nodded. Security stepped aside to allow Naomi into the aisle. No one touched her. No one needed to. The message had already been delivered. As Naomi collected her carry-on, an older woman across the aisle finally spoke. This does not seem right. Nobody answered her. Emily's heart pounded. She wanted to say something. She wanted to point to the manifest, to the executive status, to the verified records sitting inside the system. But Rebecca's earlier warning echoed in her mind. Naomi stepped into the aisle and began walking toward the aircraft door. Every step seemed to draw more attention, more whispers, more questions. At the threshold of the cabin, she paused briefly and looked back. Not at Rebecca, not at security, at the passengers, the witnesses, the people who would remember what happened here long after the flight ended. Then she stepped into the jet bridge. Behind her, the aircraft remained motionless at the gate. Ahead of her, something far larger than a seat assignment was about to unfold. And for the first time that afternoon, Naomi stopped thinking about what had happened to her and started thinking about what it was about to cost them. The jet bridge was quiet compared to the cabin behind her. The noise of passengers, rolling bags, and overhead announcements faded into a distant hum. Naomi Brooks stepped to one side, near a large window overlooking the runway, and calmly set her carry-on beside her. The operations manager lingered nearby, clearly unsure what came next. Rebecca Sullivan remained at the aircraft door, watching from a distance with the confidence of someone convinced she had prevented a problem. Naomi checked the time on her phone. Then she made a single call. The line connected almost immediately. Victoria. Her chief of staff answered before the second ring. I am here. Naomi looked out across the airfield where aircraft moved beneath the afternoon sun. Begin review protocol. There was no anger in her voice. No frustration. No dramatic speech. Just 4 words. On the other end of the line, silence lasted less than a second. Understood, Victoria replied. Level 1 or Level 2? Naomi glanced toward the aircraft behind her. Level 2. Victoria's tone became noticeably sharper. I will notify the investment committee immediately. Good. Naomi ended the call. That was it. No threats. No demands. No arguments. Yet thousands of miles away from the runway outside her window, events had already begun moving. Inside Brooks Capital Ventures headquarters in Chicago, phones started ringing. Calendar invitations appeared. Legal teams received notifications. Senior analysts paused meetings and opened confidential files. A funding agreement worth $3 million suddenly moved from active status to emergency review. Back inside the aircraft, passengers remained seated while departure preparations slowed unexpectedly. Rebecca continued speaking with the gate team, unaware of the chain reaction already unfolding beyond the airport walls. Emily Carter, however, could feel something changing. She did not know why. She only knew that the calm confidence Naomi displayed did not match the behavior of someone caught doing something wrong. The pieces simply did not fit. Emily quietly reopened the passenger profile one final time. This time she noticed something she had missed earlier. A corporate partnership notation linked to Brooks Capital Ventures. Her eyes narrowed. She clicked deeper. More information appeared. The investment firm had financial relationships with multiple transportation companies across the country. Airlines included. Emily's heart skipped. She searched the name again. Naomi Brooks. The photograph attached to several business articles appeared almost instantly. The same face. The same woman. Emily stared at the screen in disbelief. No, she whispered under her breath. Suddenly, every strange detail made sense. The confidence. The patience. The complete lack of panic. She was not simply a passenger. Emily looked toward the jet bridge door. Rebecca was still speaking confidently with the operations manager. Neither seemed aware of what Emily had just discovered. Meanwhile, several states away, executives participating in a routine financial strategy meeting received a message marked urgent. One by one, phones lit up around the conference table. The room grew quiet. A vice president frowned. A legal advisor adjusted his glasses. The airline's chief financial officer opened the attachment and felt his stomach drop. The subject line contained only 6 words. Immediate suspension of funding review process. $3 million suddenly sat on the edge of disappearing. Back at gate B-17, Naomi remained standing near the window, calm as ever. Aircraft crossed the tarmac outside. Sunlight reflected across the glass. The airport continued moving around her as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. A decision made inside a first-class cabin was now traveling through boardrooms, legal departments, and executive offices across the country. And the people responsible for that decision still had no idea what was coming. Inside the aircraft, the first signs appeared as small inconveniences. A flight delay notification flashed across crew tablets. Departure clearance remained pending. The cabin door stayed open longer than expected. Passengers began checking watches and asking questions. Rebecca Sullivan tried to maintain control. "We appreciate your patience," she announced with a practiced smile. "We expect to depart shortly." But confidence was becoming harder to perform. In the galley, a supervisor hurried through a phone call that clearly was not routine. His face tightened with every passing second. Across the cabin, Richard Langford looked annoyed. "What is taking so long?" he asked. No one answered. Emily Carter remained near the service station, staring at the information displayed on her tablet. Naomi Brooks, Managing Partner, Brooks Capital Ventures, Transportation Investment Division. The realization still felt unreal. Emily opened another article. Then another. Every photograph confirmed the same thing. The woman removed from seat 2A was one of the most influential investors in the transportation sector. Emily felt her pulse quicken. Suddenly she understood why Naomi had remained calm. She had never been trying to win an argument. She had simply been allowing people to reveal themselves. At airline headquarters hundreds of miles away, a conference room that had started the day discussing growth projections now sat in complete silence. Senior executives stared at a report projected across a large screen. At the top appeared a name every person in the room recognized: Naomi Brooks. Below it sat a recommendation from Brooks Capital Ventures: immediate suspension of all pending funding activity, pending executive review. $3 million. Frozen. Questions erupted instantly. What happened? One executive demanded. Why are we under review? Another executive scrolled through incident summaries arriving in real time from Atlanta. Passenger dispute. Escalated verification request. Removal from aircraft. Witness statements pending. The room became colder with every detail. Back at Gate B-17, the operations manager standing near Naomi received a call. He answered casually. 30 seconds later, the color drained from his face. His posture changed completely. I understand, he said quietly. Yes, sir. Immediately, he ended the call and looked toward Naomi. For the first time all afternoon, uncertainty replaced authority. Naomi stood near the window exactly as before, calm and composed. Is there something you would like to discuss? She asked. The manager swallowed hard. Ma'am, there may have been a misunderstanding. Naomi looked out toward the runway. Interesting. The manager shifted uncomfortably. I would like to resolve this. Naomi finally turned toward him. Her expression remained controlled, but her eyes carried a weight that made excuses sound small before they were even spoken. You removed me from a flight after my boarding pass was verified, my identification was verified, and my reservation was verified. The manager said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Inside the aircraft, another message appeared on crew devices. Several supervisors were instructed to report immediately to airport administration offices. Rebecca read the notification twice, then a third time. Confusion slowly gave way to concern. Around her, whispers spread among crew members. Something was happening beyond the gate. Something larger than a passenger complaint. Emily watched Rebecca's confidence begin to crack. The same certainty that had filled the cabin earlier was disappearing one unanswered question at a time. And somewhere between Atlanta and the corporate offices now scrambling for explanations, the truth was moving toward them with unstoppable speed. The collapse began long before anyone officially announced it. Rebecca Sullivan felt it first in the silence. The phones that had been ringing suddenly stopped. The supervisors who usually answered her questions now avoided eye contact. Messages arrived on crew devices faster than anyone could read them. Instructions changed. Meetings were scheduled. Reports were requested. Somewhere beyond the airport, people with titles far above hers had become interested in what happened at Gate B-17. Inside the aircraft, passengers continued waiting. Some checked flight status updates. Others watched crew members moving with unusual urgency. Richard Langford no longer looked confident. He looked confused. The certainty that had filled the cabin earlier was evaporating. Emily Carter stood near the galley holding her tablet. She had spent the last 20 minutes reviewing article after article about Naomi Brooks. Transportation investments, infrastructure partnerships, airline funding programs. The deeper she searched, the more unbelievable the situation became. Naomi was not simply an investor. She was one of the key financial partners involved in several major expansion initiatives across the industry. Emily quietly closed the screen. Her stomach tightened. Back in the jet bridge, the operations manager received another call. This time he listened without speaking. His expression became increasingly strained. Finally, he nodded and ended the conversation. Ma'am, he said carefully, approaching Naomi. Our executive leadership team would like to speak with you immediately. Naomi looked at him for several seconds before responding. That is a very different tone from earlier. The manager lowered his eyes. Yes, ma'am. Naomi picked up her carry-on. I imagine it is. At airline headquarters, executives gathered around a conference table while legal advisors reviewed incident summaries. Witness accounts continued arriving from Atlanta. Crew interactions, passenger statements, verification records. Every document pointed toward the same conclusion. Naomi's boarding pass had been valid. Her identification had been valid. Her reservation had been valid. The problem had never been documentation. The problem had been judgment. One executive rubbed his forehead. Tell me exactly who approved this escalation. Nobody answered immediately. The room had entered the dangerous phase where responsibility suddenly became difficult to find. Back at the gate, Rebecca was summoned to a private office near airport administration. The moment she entered, she noticed 3 senior managers waiting inside. None of them looked pleased. "What is happening?" she asked. One manager slid a printed report across the table. Rebecca glanced down and immediately recognized the name. Naomi Brooks. The color drained from her face. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "No," the manager replied. "The mistake happened before this report was printed." Rebecca stared at the document. Her earlier confidence shattered completely. Meanwhile, Naomi entered a conference room overlooking the runway. Several airline representatives were already waiting. The atmosphere felt entirely different now. Respectful, careful, controlled. One executive stood as she entered. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for meeting with us." Naomi placed her bag beside a chair and remained standing. "Interesting," she said calmly. "A few hours ago I was treated like someone who did not belong here. Now everyone suddenly knows my name." The room fell silent. Nobody had a response. Because everyone understood the real issue was not that they failed to recognize who she was. The real issue was how they treated someone they assumed was nobody important. The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. It did not need to last longer. The facts were already established. Every verification had cleared. Every document had matched. Every system record confirmed the same truth. Naomi Brooks had done nothing wrong. The airline representatives knew it. The legal team knew it. The executives sitting around the table knew it. The only question remaining was what they intended to do about it. One executive finally leaned forward. "Ms. Brooks, on behalf of the company, I want to apologize." Naomi listened quietly. The apology sounded sincere. But sincerity was not the same thing as accountability. "You are apologizing to me because you know who I am," she replied. "Would this meeting be happening if I were an ordinary passenger?" Nobody answered. The silence carried more honesty than any statement they could have offered. Outside the conference room windows, aircraft continued arriving and departing. Travelers moved through the terminal unaware that a decision affecting millions of dollars was unfolding only a few yards away. Naomi folded her hands on the table. The funding review remained suspended. Several executives exchanged worried glances. "Can we earn the opportunity to continue the partnership?" one asked. Naomi considered the question carefully. "Partnerships are built on trust. Today I learned something important about your culture." No one interrupted her. "You had every document, every verification, every opportunity to correct the situation. Yet assumptions carried more weight than facts." Across the airport, Rebecca Sullivan sat in a separate office reviewing the incident report. Each page felt heavier than the last. Witness statements, system records, verification logs. Everything she had believed justified her decisions now stood exposed. Not because Naomi had argued. Not because she had demanded special treatment. Because the evidence had been there from the beginning. Emily Carter was also called into a meeting later that afternoon. Managers asked questions about what she observed. She answered honestly. Nothing more. Nothing less. For the first time all day, she felt confident she had done the right thing by trusting facts instead of assumptions. As evening approached, passengers from the delayed flight finally continued their journeys. Some would remember the inconvenience. Others would remember the confusion. A few would remember something far more important. They would remember watching a woman remain calm while everyone around her rushed to conclusions. Before leaving the airport, Naomi stopped near a large window overlooking the runway. Aircraft lights flickered against the darkening sky. Her phone buzzed. A message from Victoria appeared. Funding review officially suspended. Executive committee awaiting recommendation. Naomi smiled slightly and typed a short response. Good. Let them learn from it. She slipped the phone into her pocket and picked up her carry-on. The day had never been about revenge. It had never been about embarrassment. It had never been about proving her status. It was about something much simpler. People deserve dignity before anyone knows their title, their income, or their influence. As Naomi walked toward the exit, she thought about the passengers who would never sit in a boardroom or control a major investment fund. Those were the people she could not stop thinking about. Because if this could happen to someone with power, how often did it happen to people without it? The automatic doors opened, and the evening air greeted her. Behind her, an airline faced difficult conversations and expensive consequences. Ahead of her, another opportunity waited. Naomi continued walking without looking back. The lesson had already been delivered. Bias had created the problem. Accountability had revealed it. And in the end, the most expensive mistake was not removing the wrong passenger from a flight. It was mistaking silence for weakness and dignity for a lack of worth.